You mentioned before we get on to some of the other questions, Dave, you've talked about significant followers and people that you had connected with your travel and photography business. Did that, I would assume, well, I don't want to assume, but thinking that allowed you to pivot faster into the podcast business with those folks that stuck with you, or is it a totally different audience?
It's a totally different audience and a totally different mindset. So one of the things, the reason I didn't start a travel podcast is, one, it was in the middle of a pandemic. No one cared about travel. But two, I also discovered kind of the hard way that people only care about travel when they're about to go on a trip. You don't follow travel in the same way that you follow sports or politics or technology or things like that. There's always something new going on in these areas. Celebrity gossip, music, whatever. There's new stuff. Nothing new is happening in travel, really.
It's just new to you if you're caring about a new place to go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a new hotel that opens in New York. So what?
Sure.
If you go to New York, there are hundreds of hotels. Given the number of times a person may visit, they may stay at the same hotel if they enjoyed the experience. And, it doesn't matter to most people. The Colosseum in Rome, still there. It's going to be there next year. It's going to be there the year after that.
Yeah.
They're not building any more Roman ruins. Occasionally.
At least not intentionally. Yeah.
Right. Or a cruise ship might open, but people aren't following it, right?
Yeah.
And there is a small community of people. The most passionate people, quite frankly, are more involved in like travel hacking and credit cards and that never interests me. I was traveling to learn about stuff and to see things and to explore. That's why I was traveling. So the podcast, and I should add, the podcast is named Everything Everywhere, and that is literally the topic. Literally everything, which I violated every rule of podcasting where everyone says, oh, you should niche down and have a very defined niche. I'm like, no, I just want to, every episode is something completely different. It's the Forrest Gump approach. It's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get every day.
I mean, but in that not niche, you've actually created your niche, right? You have this 10-minute show about something something historical that you are going to make interesting in 10 minutes or less or so, right. I should say. Yeah.
The tagline for the show is simply learn something new every day. And it's more often than not about something you didn't even know that you didn't know. It could be geography. I've done shows on math and science, and it usually does take a historical event where I explain how this thing came to be.
Sure.
Because a lot of times, if you think back to your math and science, they never explained why you should be paying attention. I have a degree in math, and at no point did anyone in a calculus class ever tell me what calculus was. There was never a first day where they said, this is the point of calculus. And I had to figure that out later. And then it kind of made sense in hindsight. But they just started, this is the function, blah, blah, and they just jump right into it. And there are like conceptual, you don't need to understand how to solve a lot of these equations to understand, say, what calculus is or what it's trying to do.
Right.
Or to understand, and so that's kind of the goal of the show. Yeah. To make bits of history that maybe people have heard about, but they don't really know what it is. They came across it in history and they forgot about it since then. It's something that, the Peace of Westphalia, that's a term that people may have come across, but they don't really know what it is.
Sure.
And it turns out, so I don't talk about current events on the show, but I will often talk about things that have to do with current events. And I let people put the two things together. So like the Peace of Westphalia, I did an example of that. Ended a really horrible war in Europe that most people have forgotten about, but it created this notion today of the nation state. And we have borders, and within those borders, countries can pretty much do whatever they want, for better or for worse. And crossing those borders is a bad thing. And that's kind of why we have all these multinational organizations and such. But it all stems from this treaty that was signed, centuries ago.
Yeah.
And so
this is interesting to me because you took and to sort of frame this for our listeners, you had an idea for a podcast. And I'm going to even zoom out further. You had an idea for a different business that you could launch, a different thing to add to use our terms, your revenue stack. And you've sort of walked through it a little bit and realized, this doesn't make sense for me. And you kind of put it on ice, but you had done a fair bit of the work. You like you said, you got theme music, you got a logo, you'd figured out what the name was. And then suddenly you found yourself in a scenario where you needed to add to your revenue stack. And having that stuff that was on ice and being able to go back to it and mine it and completely retool it, you weren't starting from scratch. And like, this is something that we are constantly telling our listeners about, is when those ideas come up, flesh them out as far as it makes sense to do in the moment, but don't lose any of that stuff, because someday you might find a piece of that that's valuable, or the whole thing that's valuable. You know, things evolve. We have ideas that are ahead of their time. You had an idea that was both ahead of its time and also not quite in the way that you needed it, until you found the way that you needed it and you found the time that you had to do it. So, yeah,
absolutely. And I jot stuff down all the time.
Yeah.
And even within what I'm doing now, there's a lot of plans I have going forward. The content I'm making can easily be repurposed into a YouTube channel.
Sure.
Easily. And there's many YouTube channels that are very successful, basically doing the same type of content that I'm doing. I already have the scripts written. I already have the audio done. Maybe I re-record the audio, but that's actually pretty trivial. I just need someone to help me do, put together B-roll footage.
Whatever the video element of it would be. Sure.
But at some point, once the show grows enough, I'll be able to do that. I could repurpose the scripts as ebooks and put them on like the Kindle store. Yeah. Sell it very cheap. I could do it by theme. I could do it by the month that they were put out.
I was going to say, if people still bought coffee table books, your scripts would make a perfect little coffee table book, because you could just read one a day and, enjoy.